calling this the rising tide of GenAI, and I'm going to dive straight in. I think we're no stranger. Technology disruption is not a strange thing to us in this room, right? Like we've been through this time and time again in the agency space, and it tends to come in waves, and they tend to last 10 to 15 years. If you look way back to the mainframe, I was not around to experience this, but the Mad Men episode when they introduced the mainframe was really, really good. I've been fortunate enough to live through and work through the second two sort of waves of transformation. First one being the internet on here way back in the mid-90s that brought the power of the world's knowledge within a mouse click. And then 2007, 2008, the mobile phone comes out and puts all of that power and more kind of in our pockets, and it utterly transformed our business, changed the way that we can communicate with consumers because they became empowered. And so now we're faced with this, right? We've got this new wave of transformation that is AI. And my father-in-law actually spent time in Japan as a boy, and he became really fond of Japanese woodblock prints. And this AI version is derived from one of the most famous, The Great Wave, by an artist called Hakusai in the 1860s. And I thought it was an apt analogy for what we're going to talk about today. You can see where the tiny boats here are trying to not just survive this wave of transformation, but really figure out how to harness its power for growth. And that's really kind of the challenge that we're facing today. But an even better analogy, I think, is this, which is the Lego kit of the Great Wave. Right? And so my father-in-law's love for woodblock kind of came down to my wife, was passed down to my wife. And so I bought this Great Wave Lego kit for her a couple of years ago, and I helped her put it together. It's an absolute beast of a kit. It's really complex. There's nearly 2,000 pieces to it. And so I think, again, this is just a great analogy for the challenges that we're facing when it comes to implementing AI. We've got to think about the technology, the leadership challenges, change management, impact on talent, and so forth. And hopefully what we're going to do here is provide a little bit of a roadmap and some data that'll help inform how we can navigate this and really harness it for transformation.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is that agencies, not surprisingly, have really jumped on this wave. And we're up to 75% of agencies reporting that they're actively using generative AI in their agencies. That's up from 61% just last year and well outpacing clients who are at 45%. Additionally, what we're seeing is that the looky-loos and the dabblers from last year are now getting on board and actually using it. So 96% of agencies are either actively using or actively exploring use cases. And on the lower end, we're seeing that those who are still just kind of intrigued but not yet sure how they're going to use it dropped by half, going from 9% to 4%. So agencies are well leading the way in this area. We're also seeing, as they're getting more involved with the technology, that the use cases and the opportunities are becoming more and more evident. You can see over 60% are seeing opportunities around marketing campaigns, whether that's driving greater enhanced personalization, better performance, or even just quality of the work that we're producing. But the real opportunity right now still lies in areas of productivity, with agencies either doing more, doing it faster, or having a bigger impact. Which is probably why we're also starting to see opportunities for cost savings. We actually saw that 69% of agencies are seeing opportunities in terms of cost of savings around production, which is up from 13% last year. And 57% are seeing opportunities to optimize their agency cost structures, up from 11% last year. So huge jumps. But despite all of these changes, perfect, next day. Despite all these changes, we're still very much thinking about the potential of the technology versus how that's translating into today's reality. And so while we're seeing a lot of great adoption of it, the actual usage is lagging a little bit, with more than, in fact, vastly more than half of agencies reporting that they're using it for less than half of the work that they're doing, irregardless of whether that's for clients or for their internal work. Now, at the same time, we're seeing that probably the majority of them are doing it for less than 25%, but that's still outpacing what we're seeing on the client side. So agencies are continuing to lead in this. And to quote my favorite movie, and Wesley the Dread Pirate Rabbits, why is this? Why is this lagging? Why do you think this is?
Yeah, so according to the data, it comes down to these three things. There's sort of a gap between where we are today and where we need to go, and how do we bridge that gap? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or FUD. AI raises all kinds of profound and existential questions. And then this whole thing about how we make money in the future is another one of the key questions. So we'll go through each one of these in turn. We'll start with this gap between now and next. I think we've got a good sense for where the technology is going potentially, but again, how do we get there? How do we get our organizations there, I think, is the challenge. And when you see kind of some of the data that we'll look at, the impact is not yet being felt. Like, again, we've got sort of this vision for where we need to go, but we're not yet activating against a lot of these things. So this question really is asking, how significantly has AI impacted your business, so far today? And this was the survey was in market in spring of 25. It closed about 3 weeks ago, so fairly fresh data. We asked this question 2 ways. This is today, and then we'll look at in 2 years in a minute here. But you can see that, the number one answer here is how we create content for clients. At roughly a third of the audience believing that GenAI has already impacted, how we do that. When you jump to 2 years out, it gets really interesting. Everything jumps, first of all, which is not terribly surprising. But the biggest jump maybe is in that how we produce content for clients. What content we produce for clients. And that is like the amount and the type of content that we're producing for clients. That jumps all the way out to 75%. So a productivity enabler is kind of how a lot of us are looking at GenAI. But I think probably the 2 biggest takeaways for me on this slide are the bottom 2, our business model and the composition of our organization. And you can see that the impact today is under 15%. In 2 years. For both of those, they get to just under 70%. So a significant jump in impact over the next 2 years. We think that that's good news, actually, because if you were here last year and heard us on stage, the numbers last year were 48% and 29% respectively for business model and the composition of our org. And we felt like that wasn't enough. We felt like that needed to be paid more attention to, and it's great to see those numbers grow. So we're kind of left with this question: how do we get from now to next? And just like Dr. Jones here, I think there is a bit of a leap of faith involved. We have to just kind of dive in and experiment, because that's the only way that we learn how we gain efficiency and what the impact is to our business model. We'll get into some more practical guidance as we go through the rest of the data.
Perfect. So what's making that leap of faith even a little bit harder, though, is the fact that there are so many unanswered questions around generative AI. Some of them are pretty profound, some of them are pretty practical, but they're all kind of conspiring together to muddy the waters and make it hard to know how to confidently navigate forward. Not surprisingly, legal concerns remain at the top of those things that are concerning to agencies. But as they started to get more involved with the technology and using it for client and consumer-facing work that they're doing, we're also seeing things like data privacy and security come up as more of a concern, as well as just what is coming out of these machines and whether or not it's reliable, if there's bias issues, as well as if it's accurate. Similarly, we saw increases in terms of concerns around governance and risk in regulatory compliance, and even ethical concerns continue to go up. But it's not just the external factors that are causing pause for agencies, it's also internal ones. And so we also see that the majority of agencies have concern about their agency's ability to, their employees' ability to keep up. Are they ready for the technology? Do they have the skills that they need? Additionally, we're seeing as the technology is proliferating, there's tons of new tools coming out all the time. How well am I able to understand not only what's coming out, but how do I vet it? How do I know what to use for my agency? And so all of these things are becoming challenges. But even though agencies are concerned about whether or not their employees are really ready for this technology and are able to use it, less than 20% are actually employing any type of these programs that you see up here or other. We gave them the choice of other. And so while there's a need for it, not as much activity around preparing their people is happening as we would like to see. And part of this is also that even those that maybe have great plans in place, they don't know how to measure it. There's nothing that they've put into place in terms of measuring their employees' proficiency in using these tools. And then just a little icing on the cake, there's also this lingering question of, is this stuff really even ready for prime time at this point? 61% have concerns or questions about whether or not the output from AI is really ready to be used. And so there's a lot weighing on the minds of all of us in this room, and not to go totally DEFCON 5 on everybody here, but War Games kind of played with this scenario, right? Of like, what's the worst case scenario? What could happen when you have unchecked technological advancement coupled with like a breakdown in rational decision making? It's not pretty, right? Thank God for tic-tac-toe at the end of this when the machine learns. But I think the thing for all of us to think about is, while this is an extreme scenario, putting in substantial governance, having the policies in place, making sure that not only are we training our people on the tools that are there, but also training them on the governance and making sure that they're fluent in our policies and following them. And then perhaps most importantly is making sure that we're building human oversight. Insight's good too, though, to make sure that that's part of the process and that is being built in so that people know what's going out of the agency before it does.
Great. And so this is the final section, the last little bit of collection of insights from this year's study. And it has to do with the most important thing, how we continue to make money in this AI era. I think the path, again, to sort of ROI on AI investment remains a little unclear. And as we were saying kind of at the top, framing this whole thing, well, I think a lot of us acknowledge the need to transform the model. Very few are activating or experimenting with that today. So this is the same question that we looked at earlier in terms of the challenges represented by GenAI to agencies. Before we were looking at sort of the most common responses, the top responses. These are a little bit lower down in terms of popularity, but still, a quarter to a third of our respondents are struggling with things like strategy, level of investment, and how do I fully transform the business. The biggest jump, as you can see, is in that lack of generative AI strategy. I think this is driven by the fact that we've been experimenting for the better part of 2 years or so, right? And we're figuring out those use cases, and now it's time to really frame that strategy and build that infrastructure, that strategic infrastructure that we need to really drive that next stage of growth. We put in this question. This is a new question this year that asks specifically, like, how are you thinking about and what is your anticipated return on those AI investments that you're making? And nearly 70% of our respondents basically said, I don't know, and I don't even know how to measure. So this is a critical area of focus, we believe, for the next year. So we looked at this data earlier in the presentation, but the jump was so stark that we felt like it was important to reiterate, from under 15% to just about 70% in the next 24 months of change, anticipated change in our business model and the composition of our organizations. Again, the jump is spectacular, and we think that it's good news that people are believing that change is coming, but there's a lot of intertwined things that we need to think about, which Mollie's going to talk to.
And so once again, while we all have great expectations for what the technology is going to enable for us, at the same time today, there's not necessarily a lot of visibility to it. So when we ask agencies whether or not they think they're going to see some sort of headcount reduction or overhead reduction, we're seeing that a majority anticipate having less than a 10% reduction in either of those things within the next 2 years. Even the most giddy and optimistic of us in this group only see between 21 and 30% of reduction as a result of the technology. But we're also seeing that remuneration continues to be a challenge as we think about it. Not only like what's the model, but even thinking about what's the business model behind generative AI. So last year we saw that 41% of agencies, when asked, felt that their investment in generative AI was the cost of doing business. That made me a little sad. But then we saw it jump to 75%, and that makes me really anxious for all of us. Okay. So when we asked them, well, in 2 years, what do you think the model is going to be? Luckily, that number drops down to 18%. But of those that remained, 68% are still only seeing the opportunity as to recoup the cost that we're investing at 68% versus seeing it as something that's going to really drive our business and be a line of business. Only 14% feel in 2 years they're going to have this as a line of business. And so I think the challenge for all of us is that this is a real business transformation moment that we need to be thinking about. And how do we make the transformation so that we don't miss out not only in the opportunity and the potential of what the technology represents, but that we don't leave value on the table, because that is truly what we're all providing through it. So I don't think it's a lack of imagination or smarts in this room that's keeping us from being more bullish on how do we monetize this, but I think there's a perceived lack of alignment with clients. So when we asked agencies, they highlight that productivity is the number one or most important benefit to them of using the technology. When you ask them what they think their clients' number one priority is, they think it's cost efficiency. And so I think there's a tension there that's also getting in the way of us necessarily seeing the value and the worth of what we're doing. But the good news is that when you look a little bit further into the data, what we see is that there appears to be alignment around the idea that AI is going to improve marketing performance, and that is going to deliver tangible value and value that is worth paying for. So that's where I really encourage all of us to think about how do I make sure the conversation is around the value that we're providing versus the costs and efficiencies that we're finding. And so because we're very into water metaphors for this presentation, I swear it ends with this. We all know that water can be one of the most destructive forces on the face of the earth, right? But when it's harnessed, it creates incredible power and energy that fuels the work and things that we do. And we really believe that AI is in a very similar position, or it's a nice little metaphor for us. And that AI, when harnessed appropriately, is really going to be the energy for a new era of agency value. And so I think this is a real opportunity, a really defining moment for all of us, and then one that we need to figure out and figure out fast. So 3 things, I know we're at time, but as Jeremy said, it's really about taking that leap of faith. We got to get to not just here, but to what the future is and realize that potential by putting in things like great governance, and instructing our employees and having human oversight. We can help to mitigate some of the risks. And again, it's really going to be about remuneration. It's not about cost recuperation. It's going to be about value that's worth paying for. So in terms of what's next, the full report, which has a lot more data in it, is going to be published on June 16th. That same day in Cannes, myself, Jay Patisol of Forrester, and our friends at the Wall Street Journal are going to be doing a panel discussion on the data and talking about the future of AI in agencies. So key takeaways. You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I think agency usage of AI continues to expand as we saw a massive jump in terms of usage, less so on the client side.
And I think all of us are realizing what the potential of this is going to be and are anticipating great disruption in organizational structures and how we're thinking about our business model. So embrace it is what I would say, because we're going to have a big opportunity ahead of us. Okay.
Awesome. Do we have time for questions? I know we got hung up a little bit at the beginning with tech stuff.
No.
Okay.
So we've got one question in so far, which is any suggestions for pushing back on clients' requests or expectations for cost savings due to AI?
It's a great question.
It's a good question.
There's actually guidance that we've written on this. So if you go to the Forrester's website and look for preserving value, there's a paper that goes through this in detail. I'll talk about something in just a minute in the next session, which is basically there's technology investments that go along with this as well, right? It's, as we saw in the data, we don't really know what the ROI necessarily is, but I think clients have a tendency to perceive that, oh, I'm just going to go and I'm going to get the free version of ChatGPT and I can get it to do the things that I need it to do, right? And the reality is that we all know we have to invest in enterprise-grade tools that support better security, single sign-on, data privacy, data security, right? Like all of those things are way more expensive than the free versions of these tools. So I think that's one thing that's the balance. I don't know if you have more you want to add.
No, and I think it's also just the fallacy, and I said it last year, that somehow faster and better is going to be cheaper. Just in no other world is that true. And so I think, again, going back to what's the value that we're creating for our clients and helping them to see that. I mean, if they want us to not use it, we can do it the old-fashioned way, too, and keep it just as clunky and slow as it was before. So it's really the opportunity for all of us to reap the benefits and for them to see the added benefit that they're getting from this versus seeing it as purely cost production. And for those who saw the article, P&G did an in-house lab with real products and on their real business. And even they are saying, coming out of it, that if you're just thinking about cost efficiency, you're completely missing the boat on what the value of this is. So we're hearing this from some very prominent clients, and I think that hopefully is a narrative that we continue to push through the industry.
All right, another question came in. Okay, a few more came in now, but we got time for one. How do you set AI up as a line of business? Any examples?
Good question.
I think about some of the work that you're already doing. We're all creating little mini GPTs. We're all creating products. People are doing personas, or they're coming up with other things that they're using. And these are the things that this isn't just nice things that we do. These are products. So think about the work that we're doing. I would also think about, where, it's not just about things that we can do in service of kind of the client's consumer business, but I would also think the work that you're doing today from an operations standpoint, so for my operations peeps in the audience, the work that we're doing to audit our systems, to implement these things, et cetera, this is very much like marketing automation, right? So the things that we're doing for ourselves are going to be things that clients need help doing for themselves as well. And nobody has a front row seat to client dysfunction the way an agency does. So again, these might actually become businesses within themselves that we can also be selling to our clients and get more upstream into their business.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next session as well. There's a need, as we've talked about, to shift from sort of the old model to a new model. And that model is not based on hours. It's not based on time and materials. It's based on value or outcomes. And I think starting to shift that conversation from time tracking, effectively, selling time, to what is the actual value or the outcomes or the outputs that I'm providing in a productized way, I think is one step to taking that transition. The good news also is that this question is going to be a theme throughout the entire event. So we'll have some additional presentations that will go into more detail about how to make that happen. Awesome. All right, great.
Awesome. Thank you.